Hello, welcome back to the live Q&A for today. Sorry if I'm a few seconds late. There's a little mix-up there. Hopefully you all are having a good day. Before I get started, we're going to talk today about this music rating app. It's a good example of a number of different things that we've been talking about, including using the bottle server. You can actually see the code right here that's going to be used for the bottle server. There's also we're also going to be with this doing some Ajax work, doing other sorts of things. So just before I begin, are there any questions that people have? Okay, so I don't see any questions, but so actually at the moment I don't see anybody actually watching. So I'm not sure. I'm sure the video has been loaded. So I will give students a few seconds. Looks like we have somebody. Just to make sure that there are possible questions to be answered. So we will be seeing this music rating app a number of times throughout the rest of the semester this is actually the last day of Module 3. We will be showing this in Module 4 a little bit. Just to improve upon it because it's actually a pretty reasonable app. So just to start out, just to show you, actually, I'll run this just so we have it working. Assuming it'll run. There we go. I actually have it loaded up in another window over here, just so you can see what it's like. So this is a app that we're going to be using. You can see here there are a way to add songs. So it turns out every song on YouTube, if you go to a YouTube video, has a 11-digit, grab one right here. So an 11-digit ID number. So I just grabbed one right there that I happen to have. And then we can talk about the name of it. So this is for level of concern. Artist is 21 Pilots. --prof Matthew hz.repl.co. Anybody can load it up. And if I submit this, what you're going to see is it's going to immediately appear. So we're now going to have this system. We can rate it. Might say this song's good. We can actually, if we click on the link, it will automatically add a link to that video. So you can actually watch the various videos. I've got a couple of pieces of data there. So this is sort of the app. You can get a pretty basic idea, but something that could be useful, something that could be interesting. So, one thing that we need to do is we need to run a regular Ajax server. So we're going to, for this problem, we're going to define one function that will handle the Ajax GET request. The GET request will come for /songs. And so in order to have define a function that will respond to that, it needs to have that @bottle.route annotation for /songs. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use, and again, I've used this split format where all of the web server code is in main.py. I actually moved all of the code to handle, in this case, the music rating issues into a separate file, ratings.py. So what I'm going to do is when we get this request, we will get that list of songs. Now, of course, that list of songs is a Python list, very valuable for Python, not so useful for any of our clients. Remember that the Python code will be run by Replit on their servers, But all that Replit will be doing with any of the HTML or JavaScript is really just sending it as a string to the browsers, to the programs that we're actually running this. But it's actually not even available because that's on a completely different computer. So, of course, when we get that list, whenever we want to send something web, and on the other side, on my computer, on my browser, when we receive that information, we'll be able to convert it from that JSON blob into usable JavaScript data. So after we get that song list, we'll call json.dumps in order to do that conversion. And that's the value we're going to return. And now if you look, this is the code that we need. And this is kind of silly. If we ever needed to make a change or whatever else, so it's a lot of duplicated code. And there's really no reason to do that. So I'm actually, if you look, I've actually defined a function. I named it JSON song data. And what I'm going to do is actually get rid of this. And rather than doing all that work and having to copy and paste it before, I'm just going to call JSON song data, that function, and return whatever its result is. And it's the same effective thing. I can do the same thing here. And the benefit of doing this is it means if I ever want to change this code, if I ever want to change how we're going to, what data we're going to return or how we're going to return it, it means I only have it in there's one function, only one place I need to change that code rather than having to find all of these different functions. And really, there are only 3 of them. It's not a big deal. But the other reason why I'm doing this is to I just want to point out to everybody that all of this code that we're writing here, all of this, bottle code, all this code to use that on the server side to interact with Ajax, it's just Python code. There's nothing magical about any of this. When a GET request comes in, the server will run, if it's for that URL, since it says at bottle.route, for that URL, it'll run this function. When a post request, so this is annotated at bottle.post, comes in for add song, we will go to this function. But once we get inside it, we're just running Python code. And we can make any changes we want. We can do whatever we want, just like with regular Python code. So when we add a song, what we're going to do, again, we're going to get and it's a really ugly line, I realize, bottle.request.body.read, call the read function, call decode function. But what that does is that gets the JSON blob from that incoming request. Now that is a JSON string, not really usable in Python. So what we have to then do is call json.loads that turns that JSON blob into usable Python data. And then we can, this is for add song, it will be a song. So we'll call ratings.addSong for that. And then finally, return all of our JSON song list. So one aspect of Ajax, one thing to always remember is everything always starts on the client side. It begins when the client sends a GET request or a POST request. And either way, the server, same data. For our programs, it has been so far, it will be, because that's easiest. But it just needs to return with something. It needs to say, okay, I got your request. I got your attempt to add data here. Have this back. That way you know it was successful. So we're going to do something similar with rate song there. Now, this is sort of the server side. This is what's going to run on Replit's computer, on the server for these Ajax requests. We also have to think about what's going on the client side. So we have an HTML file. Note the HTML file itself is relatively simple. We've got here in our header, we've got loading in that ajax.js file that just has that Ajax GET request, Ajax POST request functions, because we always just copy and paste them. So it's easier to put them in a file and then we can just copy and paste that file. We also are going to load in the ratings.js. That's the JavaScript file I created for this project. Then that's in our head region. That's where we load the libraries. Remember, every HTML file can have at most one head. It almost always has one body. Head is always above the body because that's normal. Now in this body here, what we're going to do is we're going to use that onload property. And remember, we can add this onload property. And what that set will do is we'll take whatever comes after that. It'll take that value, say that's JavaScript. It always treats it as JavaScript, and it will execute it. And that's a way that we can have some code that will execute when the page is loaded up. So after it's finished rendering. So here what we're going to do is we're just going to call get songs. We'll want to get all the songs. And we'll say every 5 seconds, every 5,000 milliseconds, let's call get songs again. So we can make sure that we get updated as people make changes. Again, you can see here, nobody is doing this so far, but if anybody wanted to give a rating, again, it could work. And if you were to load this up right now, you would actually see all of the same data. And you would, if you were to enter a rating, I would end up seeing it. All the clients connect to the same server. So then we have the main part of the code. And what you can see here is I've got just this add songs, and then a section for the YouTube ID and a text box, an input area for that, for the title, an input area for that, artist, an input area for that. Finally, I have that button, and I say when someone clicks submit, right? That's when they want to add a song. We'll call the function new song using that onClick property. And then below that, we just have an empty divider. We just have an empty little, or not empty divider, empty little region, empty, I guess it is, div does stand for divider, just this empty region here that will get filled in, and it was filled in this example with the data that's on our server. So we can then look at this ratings.js file. This is where all of the sort of magic happens. And so there's some of this that's just the simple functions that will begin the AJAX process. So remember, at the very start when we load up the page, and then every 5 seconds afterward, we're going to call get songs. And the job of get songs is to request all of the song data from the server. Now, the only way it has to do that, the only way our client can send a request to the server is through AJAX get request. So it'll call that AJAX get request function. It says, let's send it to songs. That's the route path on the server I want it to be sent to. And then remember that response, whenever the server responds, it might respond immediately. It could take it a little while. Depends on how long the server is responding. Also depends on what's going on in the web. When it responds, when we receive the response, what I shouldn't call it, instead, we can just rely on JavaScript to do that for us. So in the display songs function, again, we don't have to worry about calling it. JavaScript will do that when it gets a response. We're going to take in that response from the server. That is the one parameter it's going to define. And we know that that's going to be that song list as a JSON blob. So the first thing we need to do in this function is called json.parse. That is the JavaScript function that takes in a string and returns the equivalent JavaScript data. So in this case, songs is going to be that's actually a dictionary, an object of songs. I then have my accumulator. I named it div.html because it's what we're going to assign song ID to each one of the keys in that dictionary. So we're going to go through the keys. For each one, I'm going to get the value associated with that key, which itself is going to be a dictionary. Call that song. And then I'm going to update my accumulator, right? So I have div.html is assigned div.html, and then I have plus, and then what I have here is a bunch of code, and it's actually down here, this generate song HTML. And what this is going to do is this is going to do all the work to generate all that HTML for the link and for the ratings buttons, and you can see I have a function for that. And this is kind of weird and kind of yucky, right? So above this, here I have, right, get songs, which calls AJAX get request, and display songs, which displays the results. I've also got new song, which is what we call when we want to add a song, rate, which will get called when we want to add a rating. So that's all sort of AJAX related. And then down here, I have all of these helper functions whose job is really just to make that code cleaner. Now, the thing is that, again, it's kind of yucky to have two different sets of functions in the same file. It's legal, but ideally, I'd really like something a little bit cleaner. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create another JavaScript file. I named it HTML helpers. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move all of this code. I can get rid of this comment. And this code isn't really going to ever need to change. It's just the HTML helpers. So I'm going to move them into this file over here. And don't worry about the, all of what it does. If you want to read through it, there is actually a link on the course webpage. You can find this REPL and read through it. It's just generating some HTML. It's not particularly interesting, not important for this class. Now, having moved all those functions over there, if I try to run the code right now, if I reload it, let's restart it, let's reload this page, you'll see it doesn't work. And if I look at my console, it's because I had that function, generate song HTML, and it can't find it. It has no way of knowing where to find it. And the reason why is, even though the function's now in this JavaScript file, we never tell the client to load that JavaScript file. So in order for us to make it work, one of the things I have to do is update my libraries here, the thing getting libraries, and say script equals source, and then the name of the file, which is HTML helpers. And now that I've told the computer to load in that file, if I restart this, now it knows where to go to get that file. And when I reload this, now you can see it all works correctly. Now, a few of you may have caught on that I kind of cheated here a little bit. You'll note that I updated my my HTML file to load in that script. I never updated my server to serve that file. And in fact, there's also another trick that I did here. If you look at my structure on the server, you'll note that I have all of the client files, that HTML file, and all the JavaScript files in this folder I named client. And I did that because it just makes it easier to work with. All of the code that I need for the client side, that the server is just going to be serving up, it's never going to execute, I just put in a folder. Makes it a little bit easier to find everything, particularly as projects get bigger. When you get into really big projects, lots of files, that can be really helpful. So the reason I was able to do this, the reason I can not say, hey, here's where that specific file is or anything else, that's going to handle requests for that slash, that path slash that we start up with, that's going to be the main file. And you can see again, I'm returning the result of calling bottle.staticFile for index.html. But you'll note now, rather than having a root of dot, the string dot, which actually means the current folder, I say the root should be client slash. So I tell it, go into the client folder and look for that file. So that's why the index file can be, that index.html file can be in that other folder. But the other thing I'm doing, and the other trickier thing I'm doing, is right here. So you can note that for this bottle.route, I have it at slash, and then I have JS file here in a greater than less than sign, and then .js. So this is going to trigger a little bit of pattern matching that the bottle library does. And anytime there's a request for a file in that main directory that ends in .js, it's going to come into this function. And not only is it going to come into this function, but it's going to assign that parameter, JS file, to whatever was the name of the file that they had been looking for. So if you look over here, you can see every time I load it up, right, I'm getting the JavaScript file. So I'm going to get ratings.js, ajax.js, HTML helpers.js, and you can see I'm just printing out the value of that JS file. And then what I'll do is I'll call bottle.staticFile again, but rather than having a string literal here, I'm going to say take whatever the name of the file is that they're looking for, and then add .js. So ratings.js, ajax.js, htmlhelpers.js, and look for it in that client folder also. And so by doing it this way, when I made that new JavaScript file, note that I didn't have to change my server at all. It automatically knew, because it would just file into this, it just went and looked for it. So another way that we can be a little bit clever about things. So now going back to my ratings code. So we talked about how we can get songs, how we can use that Ajax GET request. We can request that song list and then display it for a new song. So when we click that new song button, like I did earlier, what we're going to do is we're going to get each of those three text boxes. So the first one is the ID input, the text box for the ID, and we'll get its value and then set that value to the empty string. And there's just a little bit of code there that gets repeated. I put that in the HTML helpers. Literally, it does exactly. It gets the value, clears the value, returns what value it had gotten. Just makes this look a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier. Then we'll get the song title, get the artist who recorded it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create an object with the keys song ID, title, and artist, and the obviously associated data as its value. That creates a nice JavaScript object. In order to send it over to our server, right, we have to send it to the server. We'll have to call json.stringify. That takes that JavaScript data, turns it into a JSON blob, and then we're going to call post request. So this is a way that we can send data to the server. So when we send data, we're still going to get a response back. We always get a response back. So we call that post request. We say send it to add song. Here is the data, that JSON blob that I just created. And again, we know we're going to get a response back. We don't know when that's going to be. So we just have to give JavaScript the function to call for whenever that response occurs. So we're just going to use the same function here, display songs. There is no requirement that we always use the same function for this. It just happens for projects such as ours, for simpler web apps, and 115, that's the way that this works. That's what we're going to do. We tend to use the same one. And then when we have a rating, someone clicks on a rating, we're going to do the same basic idea. We're going to have create an object with the keys song ID and the rating. We're going to call json.stringify, convert that object to a JSON blob, and then post that data to the server, have that data sent to the server, make sure the server can update everything, and it's going to send us that full listing of songs back, that full object with all the different songs back as display songs. So the last little bit of this, and the part that's going to be the most interesting from the standpoint of module 4 as we continue, and why we're going to be going back to this, is that ratings.py file. So this is the file that gets called by the web server code. So just those the three functions that handle the get and post requests. And what it's going to do is either get songs, will retrieve the list of songs, add song will add a song, rate song will rate it. So when we're trying to get the list of songs, note that I have my files defined for this data, right? We don't just have a simple message like last time, but we actually have a number of ratings. Since we don't have a fixed number of ratings, we need some way of handling all this. So the easiest way to do this is we're going to create two file names, two files. One CSV file, the songs.csv, that's going to have the details for each song. So the ID, the title, the artist, one per row. The other file, ratings.csv, that's going to have all of our ratings in it. So the ID and then a rating, whatever we would like. So, and I just give them file names out here because that way all of my functions I know will use the same files. I don't have to worry about having a typo anywhere. It makes life easier. It makes it much less likely that we have an error. So to get the songs, I'm actually going to create an object for all of the songs. And the reason I'm using an object rather than a list is I want to make sure each song appears once. The way that this song's object is going to work, the keys for that, I guess we're in Python land, so the keys for that dictionary are going to be those 11 character, that length of 11 string that YouTube assigns each video. Since YouTube always assigns that, I know that each video can only appear once because if I tried to re-add a song, of course, we'd see that key record by record. And for each row, what we'll do is we'll just grab whatever data is in. We then create our dictionary for that song, and we'll keep doing that. And once we've read through all the songs, we can then open up our ratings file. Again, we're going to get our CSV reader to read it in. And we know that the song ID is at row 0, at the 0th index in that row. And the last column there will be the rating. And because we want these ratings to be numbers, remember that a CSV file always reads things in as integers, but we want it to be a number. So we're going to use this function int to take that string that got read in and turn it into the int that's equivalent. So then what we're going to do is make sure that that song ID, that is a song that we know of in our dictionary of songs. And when it is, we will get the song for that and add this rating to our ratings list. So that's what we do to get that listing, that dictionary with all the songs in it. We can also talk about adding a song. So to add a song, the first thing we're going to do is get our dictionary of songs. And we're going to do that just because we want to make sure that we haven't already added this song. So that way we can check to make sure we don't add something twice. We then double check. We're going to get in this record. But of course, we have to remember that anybody can send a post request to that URL. We don't necessarily want to act on it unless it's a valid song. So what we're going to do next is check that it is a valid song, that it has that song ID key, that it has the title key and the artist key, because that's the 3 things it needs to have. And if it has all 3 of those, then we can check that whatever ID we have there has not been added yet. It's not a key, right? So that ID is not in songs. It's not a key. And we make sure that it has a title and it has an artist. We're not going to let anything with a blank title or blank artist be entered because that's just yucky. And I have it printing out just so you can see it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go through our song's file name file. We're going to open it up. We're going to open it up with an A here for append because we want to not overwrite all the old data, but just add to it. Get our CSV writer. Now the CSV writer, we're going to use write row. It needs a list. So we're going to put all of the data into a list and then write it out. Now, the last thing you can see here is I've got this return none statement. The reason I have a return none statement here is there is a lot of little secrets that this with as structure does. So there is some sort of house cleaning work, some work of when you open a file, there's actually a closing of the file you have to do. There's a bunch of different house cleaning type things you have to do that the with as statement takes care of for us, but only if it exits normally. If I just had this with as the end of my function, then it would never hit the end of that with as code suite, and the file may get a little bit messy. It actually won't matter as long as my server is running, but anytime I restart it, it could cause problems. So to solve that issue, what I did was I just added a return none statement here. If you remember, any function without a return statement automatically returns none. So this doesn't actually change how it executes it all. But because it's out of that with as code suite, it means we always hit the end of the code suite we always will do all of that house cleaning work automatically. That's what the with as takes care of for us. And finally, we're going to do the basic same idea for rate songs. So when we get into song rating, you can see I left myself a little reminder here in the comment showing me what the dictionary is going to look like. So we get the songs, make sure that the song rating is correctly constructed. It's got a song ID, it's got a rating. We make sure that we know of this song, that song that we're rating is in our list of songs, our listing of songs, that the rating is 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Lots of different ways you could write this. You could write this if, song rating greater than equal to 1, I guess 1 less than equal to song rating, less than equal to 5, to write it in a Python-esque way. But of course that would allow numbers like 1.2 or 3.4, which we don't want. Other ways you could do it. But since we just want the values 1 through 5, it's pretty easy just to make this list literal, right? This is a list. So it really is a list, but I just gave it all the values there. And to say, look, it's got to be one of those values. It's pretty easy to type out, so it made it easy. And when it is, again, we'll write a row for that record. So there are lots of other things and lots of ways that we can and will improve upon it as we go forward. For one thing that we're doing right now, we're just using a couple of CSV files, but that actually is kind of yucky. If we had lots of clients, you can imagine if we're trying to do this in YouTube. YouTube does not want to read in a CSV file of every video in its record every time. They need something a little bit fancier. We're going to talk about that. We might want to talk about how we could order these better, how we could sort them better. One last thing that we want to do, and just to show you, is right now this system is relatively insecure. So if I wanted to add another video, go grab another video. I happen to have one here in another window. So we'll give it that YouTube ID. And for the title, we'll say it's the CSE 115. And so we'll give it the title that's the final exam answers. And then for the artist, we don't want to, if we're posting the final exam answers, we don't want anybody to know who we are, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of trickery. I'm actually going to add some HTML directly here as this statement. So that's going to make the text red. I'll also make it italicized, and we'll say Hertz will never find out. End it. So, we may not want to let our users be able to dictate any sort of code that they want and have it be able to work. But if I submit this, what you're going to see is, in fact, right now, the way that we have this set up, we're going to display whatever somebody types in. And that means if they give us some HTML, here, it doesn't really do that much, right? It just makes the text italicized and red, but you can imagine it could be much more destructive. This is a good way to actually attack people, to have them download malware, to do all sorts of different tricks. It could be a problem. So that's another thing that we're going to be talking about in about a week and a half in this class. So So given all that, do you guys have any questions for me? Any other things you want to know about as far as Ajax is concerned? Okay, I don't see there being any questions. So given that, one quick important announcement. This was actually in the announcements, important announcements at the beginning of the Day 30 lectures. That's today's lectures. On Monday, in the original schedule, the plan had been that we would be handing back the midterm exams. Obviously, that's not going to happen on Monday since, one, we didn't have the midterm, and two, social distancing means I can't hand them back. The fact that we're all online means I can't hand them back. So as I was thinking about it, I realized I had sort of two choices. Either I could add some more material, give you some more work to do, really try to make, use up that time as much as possible, or give you guys a little bit of a break. Realistically, I realize that all of you have lots going on in your lives. You have lots of other classes. You're all trying to make this transition to online. It is kind of tricky. There's everything else that many of you have going on in your lives. This pandemic is quite real. New York State happens to be the epicenter. I think New York State now has more positive cases than any country in the world, other than obviously the United States. So we really are getting the brunt of it. So what I'm doing instead is Monday, there'll be some announcements. The only video will be an announcement. There will not be any lecture. There will not be a live Q&A. Instead, I'll just be around on Piazza. There will not be any Top Hat questions. Instead, what I'm going to do is give you that time to sort of review material, to go over material, to ask questions of the TAs and I, if you have them, to try to recover a little bit, to get some rest in, some relaxation in if you're all caught up, but just make it, hopefully, everybody a little bit easier, have a little bit of a rest. So given that, unless there are any more questions, if there are more questions, feel free to type them in right now. But please have a good, you're welcome. Like I said, this is a crazy time for all of us. Have a good weekend. For those of you who are observant, have a good Easter. I know that that's this weekend. For those of you who are co-religionists with me, we'll get through this matzah eventually. And if you have questions, I will be around on Monday. I will still try to be available. Over the weekend, I'll probably be available too. Remember, next week is a lab exam week, and stay safe, stay healthy, make sure you have a little bit of fun, and this will all be continuing on Wednesday. Thank you all very much. Have a good weekend.